So, you may ask, who is Max Stirner?
Well, Max Stirner wasn't actually his name. It was Johann Schmitz.
Well, he was an aspiring scholar. In his professional life, he taught in a girls' boarding school in Berlin.
He would often frequent Hippel's wine bar, along with other key communist thinkers of his time, such as Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, where they would discuss the best way to organize society.
Now, a couple of years prior to Marx's release of the Communist Manifesto, Stirner released his first book on egoism. And whilst Marx and Engels were preaching about collectivism and the loss of the individual, Stirner had, let's say, a different approach.
Max Stirner published his book, The Ego in Its Own, shortly after this. But then he left his teaching post, and he struggled to find work. To make matters worse, his wife left him after his first wife died in childbirth. At 49, he died penniless. Ouch. But despite these objections of depravity, he still was proud to stand up to his critics.
Enough chit-chat. Let's get into what Max Stirner meant when he said, morality is meaningless. Now, Stirner thought the point of life was not to study others' ideas of morality, but rather to pursue one's own unique ideals. Now, this came as quite a shock to society, as everyone always praises other people for being moral, whether it's Harry Potter sacrificing himself as the last Horcrux, whether it's Black Widow in the MCU universe, or whether it's even Jesus himself sacrificing himself on the cross. This really comes as quite a startle, but this is exactly what Stirner thought kept us in chains.
In his book, The Ego in Its Own, Stirner proposed how all systems are opposed to self-assertion. But what did he mean by this? Stirner thought that every person is a unique individual and have their own possessions which are their desires. They use their mental and physical strengths to achieve these desires. He also thought that no state or religion cared about individual progression, but only for their own selfish interests. Therefore, Stirner believed we must value our own uniqueness.
So, if all of this is true, then what would Stirner think the role of other people are?
Well, Stirner, the signal that he is, that other people are just objects we can use to establish ourselves in the world.
Now, would Stirner think that a violent and abusive action such as that would be acceptable in this world if only the individual matters? Well, yes and no. Well, now Stirner accepted that there are tyrants and oppressors in this world. In order to overthrow and release these shackles, one needs to be violent. On the other hand, as one might say, Stirner thought that just going for sensual pleasures and trying to get as much material possessions as one wants drives us away from our own sense of uniqueness. Furthermore, we want to associate ourselves with people who help to develop us and propagate our interests. This would mean that cooperation and peace can be very useful to Stirner.
What does Stirner think of the role of society? He thought it was to control the individual, and he said we must recognize his true nature. The reason for this was that Stirner saw some similarities between a religious and secular state. Where a religious state would create the image of God and punish you for turning away from it, the secular state would in turn create an image of an ideal man, whether it be the rich man, the proletariat man, and they would punish you for turning away from that. This is why Stirner thought that a secular state should still be considered religious, and even atheists themselves could still be religious.
Now, Stirner viewed any social construct, whether it be marriage, friendship, or even family itself, to be wrong. We should withdraw completely from society, be it secular or religious, and focus on our own individual desires and interests. This kind of thought is how we'll truly maximize our individuality. Well, ethical egoism might not be as good as it sounds, let's get into the problems. Now the first problem is that Stirner says that ethical guides are nothing more than rules for public behaviour, but does this not include ethical egoism itself?
Ethical theories are supposed to support human flourishing, but ethical egoism actually sabotages it. Therefore, it begs the question, is it really an ethical theory?
Now, ethical egoism specifically is in retaliation to altruism. But what does this really mean? It means that you can't help people, you can't cooperate. You're not supposed to be nice and a member of a community. Now, is this really an ethical system that you want to follow? Without getting into objective and subjective morality, it seems universal that you should want to help people. But ethical egoism doesn't just discourage this, it forbids it.
But there are some more problems. Ethical egoism can potentially support an action such as murdering an innocent person, because if it supports your own selfish gain, therefore it's good.
Now, to further that point that Theo previously just put, recreational torture, for example, would not be morally indefensible, as it would be for the person's own self-interest, and the pain that it causes does not make it immoral.
An ethical theory should be completely unbiased. But ethical egoism seems to throw this whole notion out the window. Because how can an ethical theory be more biased if it's only just considering yourself? This seems to be a serious flaw.